Um, Imagine, if you will, just a room.
Okay.
And it doesn't really matter what the physical dimensions of this room are. Like, it could be a reinforced concrete bunker buried deep underground, lit by that sterile hum of fluorescent lights.
Right.
Or it could be the suffocating, cramped, kind of oil-slicked hull of a submarine 1,000 feet below the surface of the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah, the location itself is almost secondary.
Exactly. What matters is the architecture of the decision happening inside that room.
Yeah.
Imagine that uttering a single word in this space, the word fire, will instantly, irreversibly decide whether billions of people who are right now sleeping or eating or arguing, going about their ordinary lives, will actually get to wake up tomorrow.
It's an environment that's completely designed to obliterate normal human cognition.
Yeah.
Because the scale of the stakes is so astronomically high that it just breaks our standard understanding of consequence.
It's too big to comprehend.
Right. You are standing in a space where the entire fate of human civilization is compressed into a single fleeting breath.
And now, for everyone listening to this deep dive, imagine that every single stimulus in that room is screaming at you to say that word.
Everything.
Yeah. The thick rule book you've memorized over years of rigorous military training, it dictates that you say it. The commanding officers who are literally shouting in your ear are demanding you say it.
Mm-hmm.
The glaring red telemetry screens, the deafening klaxons, the rigid doctrine of your nation, they all point in one singular, terrifying direction.
Escalate.
Fire the weapon, end the world.
Well, because the entire system, the billions of dollars of hardware and the decades of geopolitical strategy, it's engineered specifically to ensure you say yes to the apocalypse.
Right.
The apparatus demands compliance. Hesitation has been systematically designed completely out of the loop.
But then you don't.
Yeah.
You look at the screens, you listen to the alarms, you hear the screaming orders, and you quietly, stubbornly say, no.
Which is just incredible.
Yes, it is. And today, for our deep dive, we are looking at a stack of recently declassified sources, military logs, and personal accounts that map out exactly how that happened.
And we should clarify, this isn't just some dry retrospective history lesson.
No, not at all. We are exploring the terrifying intersection of automated defense systems, the fragility of human judgment, and the sheer absurd luck that allows humanity to exist right now as you listen to this.
It really is luck.
It's pure luck. We're looking at two highly specific nights, one in October of 1962 and another 21 years later in September 1983, where the survival of our species came down to two ordinary men who just decided to break the rules.
Looking through these after-action reports and the declassified logs we have, the most striking realization is that our survival didn't hinge on, brilliant diplomatic maneuvering.
Right.
Or the foolproof nature of our technology. In fact, diplomacy had completely failed at these points.
Oh, absolutely failed.
And the technology was actively hallucinating. It came down to individuals in ordinary uniforms working terrible shifts who chose to trust their own doubt over the absolute certainty of the machine.
Reading through the mechanics of these defense networks and the sources, the best analogy I could come up with is this.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine you're a passenger in a fully automated car, and you're rocketing toward the edge of a cliff at 100 miles an hour.
Terrifying.
Right. And the manual in the glove box, the manufacturer's guarantee, the dashboard display, they all explicitly say, trust the autopilot. They say the radar confirms the bridge is ahead, the system knows what it's doing.
But your physical eyes see empty air.
Exactly. Your physical eyes see empty air.
Yeah.
Your survival entirely depends on a tired, stressed passenger in the backseat suddenly deciding to ignore all those rules, leap over the console, and violently yank the steering wheel away from the machine.
That is a very apt analogy. And to understand why these men were forced to make that kind of desperate lunge for the steering wheel, we really have to look at the terrifying logic their commanders were operating under.
Right, the system itself.
Because the sprawling, world-ending apparatus of the Cold War wasn't an accident. It was built this way on purpose.
Right. The doctrine of mutual assured destruction.
MAD, yes.
I think anyone who follows Cold War history knows the basic definition. Nobody shoots, because if you shoot, you die too.
Exactly.
It's peace held in place by the promise of global suicide. But the sources we have for this deep dive go much deeper into the actual mechanics of MD.
Yeah, they do.
Specifically, there's this transition in the early 1960s that fundamentally altered how quickly the world could end.
And that transition is the key to everything that follows in these sources.
Okay, let's unpack this. Why was everything designed to move so fast?
So in the 1950s, the primary delivery system for nuclear weapons was heavy bombers.
Okay, like planes.
Right. planes like the American B-52 or the Soviet Tu-95. Now, if radar detected an incoming attack, or even if commanders just suspected one, they could scramble the bombers.
Got them up in the air.
Exactly. Send them toward the enemy, but you still have hours to verify the intelligence.
Because planes take a long time to fly across the globe.
Precisely. If it turned out to be a false alarm, you simply radioed the pilots and ordered them to turn around.
So there was a huge window for human verification.
Massive. You had hours of buffer time to figure out if it was real or just a flock of geese on the radar.
But by the early 1960s, that buffer time basically evaporates, right, because of the Intercontinental Ballistic Missile, the ICBM.
Exactly. That changed the math completely. An ICBM launched from a silo in the Soviet Union takes approximately 30 minutes to detonate over a target in the United States, and vice versa.
Just 30 minutes.
30 minutes total. But it takes time for early warning radars to actually detect the launch, right? Then they have to confirm the trajectory and pass that data all the way up the chain of command.
So by the time the actual political leaders are briefed on the situation...
They might have 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Perhaps even less. To make a decision that ends the world.
Wait, okay, let's unpack this, because I'm stuck on this logic.
Sure.
If the entire point of this doctrine is, nobody fires because it's global suicide, why purposely build a system that practically forces you to pull the trigger in under 10 minutes without even thinking?
It does seem completely counterintuitive today.
It really does.
Yeah.
I mean, you're trying to prevent a war, but you're building a machine that basically guarantees one the second a sensor glitches.
You have to look at it through the lens of deterrence theorists of that specific era.
Okay.
The fatal flaw in ME is vulnerability. For the deterrent to actually stop the enemy from attacking, they have to believe with 100% certainty that they will be destroyed if they launch a first strike.
Right. The threat has to be real.
But if your ICBMs are sitting in their silos and the enemy's missiles are 20 minutes away from vaporizing those silos, you are faced with the ultimate use-it-or-lose-it scenario.
Oh, wow. Because if they hit you first, you can't hit back.
Exactly. If you wait to verify the attack, your weapons might be destroyed in the ground. Your ability to retaliate is gone.
So to guarantee the threat of retaliation, the retaliation has to be essentially automated.
It does.
It's like installing a home security system that doesn't just call the police when a motion detector trips in the backyard. It automatically fires a shotgun through the front door.
That's a very dark but very accurate way to put it.
Right. It doesn't let you check the cameras to see if it's just a raccoon. It just shoots. Because waiting to check the camera might mean the burglar gets the upper hand.
That is the terrifying paradox right at the heart of the doctrine. The military planners realized that human judgment, the instinct to pause, to verify, to hold a meeting, to doubt, that was all a strategic liability.
Wow. Human hesitation was a bug, not a feature.
Precisely. Hesitation meant you might lose your arsenal before you could fire it. So the architecture was engineered to strip away human hesitation. They created what was called a launch on warning posture.
Launch on warning.
Yes. Decisions that would determine the survival of human civilization were reduced to just binary inputs.
They built a doomsday machine, and then they placed human beings at the very bottom of the chain of command, essentially acting as meat puppets for the computer.
That's exactly what they were.
Their only real job was to rubber stamp the apocalypse when the buzzer went off. Which brings us directly to the first major test of this incredibly flawed logic.
Right. The first real-world stress test.
We're moving to October 1962. From the abstract geopolitical doctrine, we want to pull you down into the physical, suffocating reality of a submarine where the theory of automated destruction met the chaos of the real world.
The Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah. And most historical accounts of this focus on the high-level diplomacy, right? Between John F. Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev, the back-channel negotiations, the naval blockade of Cuba.
That's stuff in the textbooks.
Exactly. But the sources we are examining today, they pull us far away from the Oval Office in the Kremlin, plunging us down into the Caribbean Sea.
So, the setup here is that the U.S. Navy has completely encircled Cuba to prevent Soviet ships from delivering more ballistic missiles.
A massive blockade.
But what the American public, the U.S. Navy, and frankly, most of the men in the Kremlin don't fully grasp in that exact moment is that the Soviets have secretly deployed 4 diesel-electric submarines to the Caribbean.
And they are armed.
Very armed. And we are going to focus entirely on one of them, submarine B-59.
Now, a quick technical question here based on the sources. Why did the Soviets send diesel submarines instead of nuclear ones?
Well, the Soviet nuclear submarine fleet was still in its infancy at that time, and it suffered from severe reliability issues.
Okay, so they were kind of glitchy.
Very. They simply didn't have enough operational nuclear boats to project power globally in 1962. So they relied on their workhorses, the Project 641 submarines, which were known to NATO as the Foxtrot class.
The Foxtrot class.
Right, and these were formidable vessels, heavily armed, but they had a critical operational limitation. They were built and optimized for the freezing, icy waters of the Arctic and the North Atlantic.
Oh, no.
Yeah, they were absolutely not engineered for the tropical warm waters of the Caribbean.
Let's talk about the physical mechanics of that, because the sensory details in these submarine logs that we reviewed, they're just brutal.
It's hard to read, honestly.
A diesel-electric submarine has to surface, or at least raise a snorkel mast to run its diesel engines, right?
Correct. Running the diesels allows them to recharge the massive battery banks that power the submarine when it's fully submerged.
But because the entire U.S. Navy is hunting them with anti-submarine aircraft and destroyers, B-59 can't surface.
Not without being instantly captured or destroyed.
Right. So they are forced to stay deep underwater, running purely on battery power, just trying to hide.
And hiding in warm water creates a catastrophic cascade of engineering failures.
Because it's not the Arctic.
Exactly. The surrounding ocean temperature in the Caribbean was around 30 degrees Celsius or 86 degrees Fahrenheit.
Which doesn't sound that hot for a beach day, but inside a metal tube. Inside a metal tube with engines, it's a nightmare. The submarine's cooling systems, which were designed for the Arctic, were completely overwhelmed. The ambient temperature inside the steel hull quickly skyrocketed past 50 degrees Celsius.
That's over 120 degrees Fahrenheit.
Consistently, everywhere on the ship.
The accounts describe men literally wasting away. The air conditioning has failed. The massive battery banks are draining rapidly, which means they are losing power for essential life support systems.
Yeah, the life support was basically shutting down.
The carbon dioxide scrubbers are failing, meaning the air is becoming increasingly toxic with every single breath the crew takes. It's getting so bad that sailors are fainting at their duty stations from oxygen deprivation.
And on top of that, the water desalination systems were shut down to conserve battery power.
Oh, man.
Meaning fresh water was strictly rationed. The crew was allowed barely 1 glass of water a day in 120-degree heat.
1 glass.
They were covered in rashes, dangerously dehydrated, and suffocating. It is a profound level of physical and psychological torture.
And to compound all of that physical suffering, they're completely deaf and blind to the outside world.
Completely cut off.
Because they have been submerged so deeply for so long to evade the American sonar nets, B-59 has lost all radio contact with Moscow.
They haven't received a broadcast in days.
They have absolutely no idea what is happening on the surface. And the last intelligence briefing they received before going silent indicated that the two superpowers were on the absolute brink of thermonuclear war.
So for all Captain Valentin Savitsky and his crew knew, the war had already begun.
Right, they assumed the worst.
The geopolitical tensions were already at a boiling point before they submerged, and the psychological isolation inside that dying submarine just acted as a pressure cooker.
Then on October 27th, the catalyst happened.
A spark.
An American anti-submarine task force, led by the aircraft carrier USS Randolph and accompanied by around 11 destroyers, they finally pinpoint the location of B-59.
They find them.
The Americans surround the area, and they begin dropping depth charges. Now, let's unpack the tactics here, because this is where the system almost fails catastrophically. The U.S. Navy isn't actually trying to sink the submarine, right?
Correct. The Americans were dropping practice depth charges, essentially large acoustic grenades.
Acoustic grenades.
Yeah. According to U.S. naval doctrine at the time, dropping a specific pattern of these small charges was the international signal demanding a submerged submarine to surface and identify itself.
Like a warning shot.
It was a knock on the door, an aggressive demand to come up for air.
But the American commanders didn't account for the lethal language barrier of naval warfare.
No, they didn't.
The Soviet submariners had never been trained on U.S. signaling protocols. They didn't have a manual that said, hey, 3 small explosions means please surface.
The asymmetry of information here is just astounding. The Americans think they are delivering a firm but non-lethal warning.
Right.
But put yourself inside the hull of B-59, you are sweltering in the dark, suffocating on carbon dioxide, utterly exhausted.
Dehydrate.
Suddenly, massive acoustic shock waves begin hammering against the steel hull. The lights shatter. The submarine violently shudders.
Going back to our analogies, imagine being locked inside a dark, boiling sauna.
Yeah.
You're gasping for air, severely dehydrated, and your radio to the outside is dead. Suddenly, someone starts beating on the outside of the door with a sledgehammer.
And you don't know why.
Because you've been cut off from the world, you have no idea if the rest of the building is already burned to the ground. You might be the last person alive, and now whoever destroyed the building is trying to kill you too.
That accurately describes the psychological state of Captain Savitsky in that exact moment. He reaches his absolute breaking point.
Zaps.
The logs indicate he became convinced that World War III had already erupted on the surface. Surrounded by what he perceived as a lethal, coordinated attack aimed at sinking his vessel, Savitsky made a decision.
And this wasn't a decision to fire regular torpedoes either.
No.
B-59 was carrying a secret payload. The Americans dropping the depth charges had absolutely no idea, but this Foxtrot submarine was armed with a T-5 nuclear torpedo.
Which is terrifying.
We are talking about a 10-kiloton warhead, roughly the yields of the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima.
Savitsky orders the nuclear torpedo to be made ready for immediate launch. His rationale, born of desperation and lack of communication, was simple. The logs basically quote him as saying, "We're going to die down here, but we are not going to disgrace our Navy. We will take an American aircraft carrier down with us."
Let's pause on that and look at the actual mechanics of what happens next, because
Okay.
this is fascinating. On a standard Soviet submarine at the time, launching a nuclear weapon required a two-key lock system.
Right.
It wasn't literally two physical keys in a dashboard like you see in the movies, but it required the explicit agreement of two men, the captain of the submarine and the ship's political officer.
Who was there to ensure ideological loyalty to the state?
Right, to make sure the captain wasn't going rogue. And on B-59, the political officer, Ivan Maslenikov, sided completely with Captain Savitsky.
He did. He agreed that war had likely started and that firing the nuclear weapon was the correct doctrinal response.
So, 2 out of 2.
Mm-hmm.
Under standard operating procedures, that torpedo leaves the tube.
It does.
And if that happens, an American aircraft carrier is instantly vaporized.
Hmm.
The U.S. military, which is already on DEFCON 2, detects a nuclear detonation on their fleet and immediately retaliates with a full-scale nuclear strike on the Soviet Union and its allies.
The doomsday machine activates.
World War III begins. So why didn't it?
Because B-59 was not a standard submarine.
Right.
It happened to be the command submarine for the entire 4-sub-flotilla that had been sent to the Caribbean.
The flagship, basically.
Exactly. And because of that specific command status, the launch protocol required a third signature, a 3-key lock.
Oh, wow.
The commodore of the flotilla happened to be aboard B-59. His name was Vasili Arkhipov, and he was 36 years old.
And in the middle of this boiling, shaking, panic-filled control room, with his captain screaming to fire and the political officer backing him up, Arkhipov simply says no.
He does. He refuses to provide the third authorization.
It is an incredible moment of clarity amidst utter chaos. Arkhipov stands his ground. He argues against the prevailing panic, insisting that the American depth charges are too small and too rhythmic to be a lethal attack.
Which is brilliant analysis under pressure.
He deduces, correctly, that these are signaling charges. He argues that they have no orders from Moscow, no concrete confirmation that a war has begun. He demands that rather than launching the weapon, they must surface the submarine, recharge the batteries, and face the American fleet.
But we have to dig into why Arkhipov was able to maintain that clarity when everyone else was literally losing their minds.
Yeah, here's where it gets really interesting, because the sources provide a vital piece of his backstory.
It's the key to his whole reaction.
Just 1 year prior to the Cuban Missile Crisis, Arkhipov was serving aboard the K-19, which was one of the Soviet Union's first nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines.
And the K-19 is a very infamous vessel in naval history.
The Widowmaker, they called it.
Exactly. During its first operational patrol in the North Atlantic, the submarine suffered a catastrophic failure in the primary cooling system of its nuclear reactor.
Oh, boy.
The reactor core began to overheat rapidly, pushing toward a complete meltdown and a thermonuclear explosion.
So to stop the meltdown, the crew had to literally jury-rig the secondary water supply line and weld it directly into the reactor compartment.
Under immense pressure.
But to do that, men had to go into the heavily irradiated zone in shifts, exposing themselves to lethal doses of radiation. The engineering details of that disaster in the source material are horrifying.
Truly horrifying.
The men were absorbing thousands of Roentgens. Arkhipov was the executive officer on that sub. He survived, but he was irradiated, and more importantly, he watched his own crewmates die.
And we really have to understand what acute radiation syndrome actually looks like.
It's not a clean death, is it?
No, it is not. The men who went into that reactor compartment suffered severe cellular damage. Their skin blistered and keeled away, their bone marrow died, their internal organs broke down.
Good God.
Arkhipov visited these men as they died in absolute agony over the following days and weeks. He carried that profound visceral trauma with him into the control room of B-59.
Which raises a crucial question for you as we look at this. Did Archipov's trauma from the K-19 disaster make him simply too terrified to push the button? Like, was it a trauma response that paralyzed him? Or did it actually make him the only clear-headed person in the room about what that weapon truly represents?
Based on his subsequent actions and the accounts we have, it was absolute clarity.
Clarity.
Yes. The other men in that sweltering control room, Savitsky, Maslenikov, they understood the nuclear torpedo as a piece of military hardware.
An abstraction.
Right. They viewed it as a tactical response, an abstract concept of retaliation that was just mandated by a rulebook. Arkhipov understood the weapon physically.
He'd seen it.
He knew intimately what nuclear energy does to human flesh and bone. To him, the torpedo wasn't a theoretical deterrent. It was a localized apocalypse.
Wow.
That first-hand knowledge of radiation poisoning grounded him in a horrific reality that pierced right through the panic and the doctrine.
He brought them back from the edge. Archipov's stubborn refusal prevails. B-59 blows its ballast tanks and rises to the surface, breaking the water right in the middle of a literal ring of U.S. Navy warships.
Imagine that sight.
They raise their flag,
Oh.
they are allowed to turn around, and they sail back toward the Soviet Union. The crisis ends.
And the Americans had absolutely no idea how close they came to being vaporized.
The public didn't know at all.
No. The world survived entirely because one man happened to be on that specific submarine, possessing a specific trauma that allowed him to veto a doctrinal order.
It's chilling.
But the deeply unsettling part of this historical narrative is what the military apparatus learned from the near miss.
Yeah. You'd think they'd step back and reevaluate everything.
You'd think. But they didn't dismantle the doomsday machine. They concluded that human communication and localized control were the flaws.
The human was the problem.
Exactly. So they updated the system, they made it more automated, faster, and even further removed from human oversight.
They learned the completely wrong lesson. They decided to trust the machines more. Which brings us directly into the second half of our deep dive today.
A different era.
We are fast-forwarding 21 years. The geopolitical environment has shifted from the sweltering tension of the Caribbean to the icy paranoia of the 1980s, September 1983 to be exact. And the doomsday machine now has an eye in space.
The fall of 1983 is arguably the most dangerous period of the entire Cold War, perhaps even more perilous than the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Really? More perilous?
Yes, because the threat wasn't public. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, everyone knew the stakes. In 1983, the tension between the Ronald Reagan administration and the Soviet leadership under Yuri Andropov was incredibly toxic, but mostly behind closed doors. The U.S. was deploying Pershing II intermediate-range nuclear missiles to Western Europe, which could hit Moscow in a matter of minutes.
Not 30 minutes anymore?
Exactly. The Soviets were genuinely terrified of a decapitating first strike.
And there's a very specific, very bloody incident that sets the stage for the extreme paranoia of September 1983.
A tragedy, really.
Just 3 weeks prior to the event we're going to discuss, this happens in Soviet airspace.
Right. On September 1st, Korean Airlines Flight 007, which was a civilian Boeing 747 carrying 269 passengers and crew, inadvertently deviated from its planned route and flew deep into restricted Soviet airspace near Sakhalin Island.
The Soviet military, already on edge and mistaking the passenger jet for an American RC-135 spy plane that had actually been operating in the area earlier, they scrambled fighter jets. And despite the fact that it was a civilian airliner, the Soviet command structure was so rigid and paranoid that a fighter pilot was ordered to fire.
They shot the 747 down. All 269 people were killed, including an American congressman, Larry McDonald.
The global backlash was just immediate and furious. President Reagan condemned it as a massacre.
And the Soviet leadership, realizing their horrific mistake but refusing to fully admit fault, became incredibly defensive.
They doubled down.
They convinced themselves that the United States might use the international outrage over KAL 007 as a pretext to launch a preemptive nuclear strike.
So everyone is on edge.
The Soviet early warning networks were placed on maximum alert. Everyone was jumping at shadows.
Into this powder keg of paranoia, we introduce our second individual from the sources, Stanislav Petrov. Now, Petrov's profile is entirely different from Vasili Arkhipov's.
Completely different background.
Petrov is not a hardened frontline submarine commander who has watched men die of radiation poisoning. He's a software engineer.
Right.
Specifically, he is a lieutenant colonel in the Soviet Air Defense Forces, whose primary job was developing the algorithms for a brand new, highly sensitive satellite early warning system called OCO, which translates to the eye.
And to understand what happens next, we have to look at the mechanics of the OCO system.
Let's do it.
The Soviets had launched a constellation of satellites into highly elliptical orbits, known as Molniya orbits.
Okay, Molniya orbits.
These orbits allowed the satellites to linger for long periods over the northern hemisphere. Their payload consisted of highly sensitive infrared telescopes.
Right. The idea was that if the United States launched its Minuteman ICBMs from their silos in the Midwest, those solid rocket boosters would produce a massive, brilliant infrared heat signature.
A huge plume of heat.
The OCO satellites, looking down from space against the cold, black background of the Earth's edge, would detect that specific heat plume instantly.
The tactical advantage here was time. Ground-based radars can only detect a missile once it physically rises over the curvature of the Earth, the horizon line.
Right, line of sight.
And that takes several minutes. The OCO system was designed to detect the launch the literal second the rockets ignited, giving the Kremlin an extra 10 to 15 minutes of warning time.
Which is an eternity in nuclear war.
Exactly. Time to launch their own missiles before the American warheads destroyed them in the ground.
But the critical context here from the documents is that the OCO system was flawed.
Very flawed.
Because of the intense paranoia of the early 1980s, the Soviet military bureaucracy had rushed the system into operational service long before all the software bugs had been ironed out.
Standard bureaucratic pressure.
And Petrov, because he was one of the key engineers who built the system, he intimately knew its architecture. He knew it was prone to false data.
Which creates a fascinating operational paradox.
Yeah, it does.
Because on paper, having the system's architect sitting at the command console is a terrible idea for a military that demands unquestioning obedience.
Right.
Military doctrine requires the duty officer to act as a flawless conduit of information, just a human relay switch. You are supposed to obey the machine's output without analyzing its internal code.
Wait, I'm stuck on this point. If Petrov is the software engineer who knows the system is a buggy mess, why on earth is he the guy sitting in the command chair at the secret Serpukhov 15 bunker outside Moscow? Was the Soviet military that disorganized, or was this just the luckiest scheduling mix-up in human history?
It was essentially a scheduling anomaly that altered human history.
Wow.
Petrov was not scheduled to be the duty officer that night. Another officer called in sick, and Petrov, as a senior officer familiar with the facility, was ordered to fill in for the overnight shift.
So a guy calls in sick, and the fate of the world shifts.
Exactly. So you have a man placed in the command chair who possesses a fundamental distrust of the very machine he is supposed to be monitoring.
And that distrust is put to the ultimate test. The tension is perfectly set. Let's walk you through the exact timeline of September 26, 1983.
It's a gripping timeline.
It is just past midnight. Petrov is sitting in the control room. The bunker is quiet. Suddenly, the automated systems shatter the silence. A massive backlit red screen dominates the wall, and it illuminates with a single glowing word. Lawn, joke is H.
The klaxons begin to wail. The OCO satellite network is reporting, with the highest level of system confidence, that it has detected the infrared signature of a single U.S. intercontinental ballistic missile rising from American soil, heading straight for the Soviet Union.
The strict military doctrine, the launch-on warning posture we discussed earlier, is entirely unambiguous in this moment.
Crystal clear.
When the system says launch, Petrov is not supposed to think. His one and only job is to pick up the red phone, report the incoming attack to the Soviet High Command, and initiate the cascade of protocols that will result in a massive Soviet nuclear counterstrike.
He is the first domino in a chain of automated annihilation.
But Petrov hesitates.
He does.
He refuses to pick up the phone immediately. And the logic behind his hesitation is a brilliant example of systems-level thinking overriding algorithmic certainty. He looks at the Alert 1 missile, and he applies human strategic logic to the data.
Right. He thinks that makes absolutely no strategic sense.
Right. If the United States has decided to start World War III, why would they launch just one missile?
A nuclear first strike is meant to be overwhelming. You would launch hundreds, perhaps thousands of missiles simultaneously to completely cripple the enemy's command centers and silos before they could shoot back.
Exactly. Launching a single missile is illogical. It just alerts the enemy and invites your own destruction.
Petrov prioritizes his understanding of human psychology and strategic warfare over the flawless binary confidence of the computer. He decides to classify it as a computer error and reset the system.
Bold move.
But the machine is not done. The situation escalates violently.
A few minutes later, the system blares again. The screen flashes. A second missile is detected.
And a third.
A fourth, a fifth. Now the computer is screaming that 5 nuclear missiles are inbound. The alarms in the bunker are deafening.
Pure chaos.
The other officers in the room, dozens of technicians and analysts, are completely rattled. They are looking to Petrov. The pressure on him to just pick up the phone and report the attack to Yuri and drop off is unimaginable.
The stakes in those seconds are mathematically infinite. Every second Petrov waits, he is risking the complete destruction of his country without the ability to fight back.
Yeah.
If the computer is right and he delays the report, the Soviet Union dies in silence. The missiles will impact in roughly 20 minutes.
But Petrov holds his ground. He looks at the shape of the attack, so to speak. 5 missiles is still a remarkably small number for a decapitating first strike.
It's still not enough.
It still doesn't fit the strategic profile of how a nuclear war would begin. Furthermore, he checks the secondary warning system, the ground-based, over-the-horizon radars.
This is a crucial technical detail.
Let's hear it.
The ground-based radars operate on different physics. They rely on bouncing radio waves off the ionosphere to see beyond the curvature of the Earth. But they can only detect physical objects in flight, not heat plumes.
Okay, that makes sense.
Petrov checks the radar telemetry, and the radar operators report absolute silence. The screens are clear.
So you have a massive technological discrepancy. The cutting-edge satellite in space is shouting that the end of the world is here, while the older ground-based radar is completely silent.
A conflict of data.
Petrov makes a terminal decision.
Right.
He picks up the phone, calls the duty officer at Soviet military headquarters, and reports the alarm not as an incoming American attack, but as a system malfunction. A false alarm.
And then begins the most agonizing wait in human history.
I can't even imagine.
By reporting it as a false alarm, he has broken the chain. But he cannot definitively prove in that exact moment that the system is malfunctioning.
Right, he's just guessing based on logic.
He simply has to trust his human doubt over the machine's certainty. He has to sit in that chair for 15 minutes, the time it would take for those 5 American missiles to hit their targets in the Soviet Union, just to see if he was right.
Oh, man.
If he was wrong, he will know when a thermonuclear flash vaporizes Moscow.
I cannot even fathom the psychological endurance required to sit in that chair and watch the clock tick down.
It's beyond comprehension.
But of course, the minutes pass. The bunker doesn't shake. There are no sirens outside, no detonations. The radar remains clear. Petrov was right.
When Soviet scientists and investigators later tore the OCO system apart to figure out what actually caused the hallucination, the answer they found was almost absurd in its simplicity.
What was it?
It wasn't a sophisticated American cyber attack. It wasn't a secret stealth weapon. It was geometry and sunlight.
Let's explain the mechanics of this because it's fascinating in the reports. The OCO satellite was in a highly specific orbital position shortly after the autumnal equinox.
Right.
The sun, the satellite, and the high-altitude clouds over the American missile fields in North Dakota all aligned perfectly.
A perfect storm of geometry.
The sun glinted off the top of these clouds at a highly specific, rare angle. The satellite's infrared sensors picked up that intense reflection of sunlight and mistook the thermal signature for the fiery exhaust plume of a Minuteman solid rocket booster.
It is terrifyingly poetic. The world was nearly brought to an end by a trick of the light.
A trick of the light.
It perfectly illustrates the inherent danger of removing human interpretation from complex defense networks. The computer performed its task flawlessly based on its programming. It saw a massive infrared signature where a missile silo was located, and it reported a launch.
Because it didn't know any better.
It lacked the contextual awareness to understand why that specific infrared signature made no strategic sense. Only Petrov could provide that context.
A trick of the light almost ended the Northern Hemisphere. It's staggering to think about. Which brings us to the aftermath of both of these events.
What happened next?
Right. We have these 2 men, Vasili Arkhipov and Stanislav Petrov. 2 men who, under unimaginable pressure, quite literally saved the world by refusing to follow the rules. So how did the military structure thank them? What parades were thrown?
Well, the answer is absolutely none.
None.
The decades of secrecy surrounding both of these near misses are profound. They were driven by the intense culture of state secrecy within the Soviet Union.
Right, you can't air your dirty laundry.
The state apparatus was entirely uninterested in publicizing its near-fatal technological errors, or the individuals who disobeyed military doctrine to fix them. Acknowledging Petrov or Arkhipov meant acknowledging that the infallible Soviet military machine had almost destroyed the world by accident.
So Arkhipov simply went home after the Cuban Missile Crisis. He was quietly debriefed. He continued his naval career, eventually rising to the rank of vice admiral, and he died in 1998.
And nobody knew.
The world only widely learned about what he did on B-59 around 2002, 4 years after his death, when old operational logs were finally declassified and discussed at a historical conference in Havana. He never got to hear a single person outside of his crew call him the man who saved the world.
And Stanislav Petrov's story is equally muted. He wasn't court-martialed for disobeying doctrine, but he certainly wasn't rewarded.
Yeah, his career kind of stalled, right?
It did. He was eventually reassigned to a less sensitive post and retired early. He lived out his life as a modest pensioner in a small apartment outside Moscow, completely unknown to the public.
Just a normal guy.
Sometimes he struggled just to make ends meet. His story didn't surface until 1998, when his former commanding officer casually mentioned the incident in a memoir.
Petrov died in 2017, and the news of his death didn't even make international headlines until months later, when a friend happened to call his apartment and his son answered.
Just unbelievable.
Both men were eventually recognized, mostly late in life or posthumously, with honors like the Future of Life Award. But it highlights this bizarre reality, an arithmetic of gratitude. Every single person alive today owes their existence, their future, to two obscure men who were practically ignored by the history books during their lifetimes.
Yet, when you look at the interviews Petrov gave late in his life or the accounts of Arkhipov's colleagues, neither of them ever acted out of a desire for glory.
They weren't seeking fame.
Not at all. They both acted simply because it was the fundamentally right thing to do in a moment of utter darkness. Petrov famously rejected the title of hero. He repeatedly stated, "I was just doing my job. I was simply the right person in the right place at the right time."
It makes you wonder, is it a prerequisite that to save the world in a situation like this, you have to be exactly the kind of person who doesn't care about being famous or remembered for it?
That's a great point.
You have to be so detached from ego that you can just look at a multi-billion-dollar computer system telling you to start a war and possess the quiet confidence to say, no, this is wrong, without thinking about the medals or the firing squads.
I think there is a profound truth in that assessment. When ego and ambition are completely removed from the equation, you are left only with raw conscience and professionalism.
Yeah.
They didn't view themselves as saviors. They viewed themselves as experienced professionals who just refused to abandon their common sense when the system demanded they do so. Doing the right thing in the dark, without expectation of reward or fear of punishment, might indeed be the purest form of heroism our species has to offer.
As we synthesize everything we've pulled from these sources today, a very clear overarching theme emerges. When we picture the apocalypse, whether it's in movies, books, or political rhetoric, we almost always picture it as a deliberate evil choice.
A bad guy pressing a button.
Exactly. We picture a villainous leader slamming a fist on a red button out of malice or greed or ideological hatred.
But the terrifying truth revealed by these declassified records is entirely different.
Entirely.
The end of the world nearly arrived not through malice, but by sheer banal accident.
Yeah.
It was almost brought about by a faulty air conditioning unit, by a dying battery, by the language barrier of naval signaling, by exhausted men in a sweltering metal tube, and by sun glare off a high-altitude cloud. The apocalypse wasn't a choice. It was a cascading systems failure.
And for you listening, the ultimate takeaway is this. What actually stood in the way of Armageddon on those two nights wasn't a carefully negotiated peace treaty. It wasn't a brilliantly designed weapon. It was the stubbornness of human doubt.
Human doubt.
It was the willingness of a human being to look at a machine that was absolutely mathematically certain and realize that the machine lacked context.
In military doctrine, and often even in modern corporate culture, doubt is framed as a weakness. It is seen as a lack of resolve or inefficiency.
Right, you want decisiveness.
But in the context of these automated doomsday machines, doubt was the ultimate safeguard. Human hesitation was the firewall that protected humanity from the flawless execution of its own destruction.
Which leaves us with a deeply provocative thought to mull over long after this deep dive ends. Today, we are handing over more and more split-second decisions to artificial intelligence.
It's everywhere now.
We are developing algorithmic trading programs that control the global economy. We use AI in our power grids, our healthcare logistics, and increasingly in autonomous defense networks like drone swarms and automated retaliation systems. We are actively building machines designed to act, react, and execute faster than a human brain ever could.
Because the velocity of warfare and decision-making is accelerating beyond the biological limits of human thought. The machines are becoming infinitely faster and vastly more complex.
But if the only thing that saved humanity in 1962 and 1983 was a human being breaking the rigid rules to doubt the machine, are we systematically engineering out the very hesitation that kept us alive?
It's a terrifying thought.
What happens when the next Petrov sitting at the console isn't a tired, experienced human who knows how to question the data, but an algorithm that hasn't been programmed to say no?
It is the defining existential question of our technological age. If we build defense networks that are incapable of disobedience, we place ourselves entirely at the mercy of their programmed certainty.
Right.
And as the historical record has starkly demonstrated, perfect certainty can lead directly to perfect destruction.
It's a heavy weight to carry around. But as you go about your day today, maybe take a moment to be incredibly grateful for the quiet, unremarkable people doing the right thing in the dark. Remember that automated car rocketing toward the cliff we talked about? And just be thankful for the passenger who finally decided to grab the wheel. Take care of yourself, stay curious, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.